Two flights, same airline, but two different experiences. British Airways receives its fair share of criticism, but is it deserved? Keep watching to find out why there's such a big difference. Our flight today takes us from London Heathrow to Dubai International Airport. Our journey started off after dropping the car off in the car park adjacent to Terminal 5. The car park is conveniently located for meet and greet parking services. The first thing you'll notice is that the terminal is like a massive hangar. It's amazing that they managed to make the ceiling without any central pillars or supports. Departures are on the first floor while arrivals are on the ground floor. Business class check-in is at the far left-hand side of the terminal by Zone A. Premium economy is at Zone B, with the remaining zones used for economy class passengers. As you enter the terminal, it can be a bit confusing as to where you're meant to go. Unlike other terminals, Terminal 5 is for the sole use of British Airways flights. This helps by making things easier. Unlike other airports, you don't have to go to a specific zone or check-in desk for your flight. In fact, there aren't any traditional check-in desks to speak of. Things have moved on here. If you've ever used a self-checkout at a supermarket, imagine that, but for an airport. I do quite like this setup of this terminal. It's actually done really well. Spacious. There's no long queues for each check-in desk because everything's kind of like spread out, and I guess you can use any zones really. So I've just been to that desk over there. I'm not sure if you can see it, but basically they're selling upgrades on certain flights. So I inquired about our flight to Dubai, and it's a full flight, so they can't really sell it for that one, but it's good to know that they are upselling, and if you've got the cash, well, you never know, you might actually get a good deal sometimes. If you've checked in online, you can simply scan your boarding passes here, or alternatively, if you haven't checked in, you can check in and print your boarding passes all at this very terminal. There are staff nearby to assist, but it's very straightforward to use. So I guess once you're scanned in, drop your bag off. We've got our boarding passes, so we can head straight in. The next step is to perform the bag drop. This involves scanning your boarding pass, weighing your bag, and then printing a bag label. Once the label is attached to your bag, you click Send Bag and the receipt is printed. You do also get further options after this to purchase additional baggage, or more usefully, drop off your hand luggage for free. You need to scan each person's boarding pass if each person has a bag to drop off. This is because the standard baggage allowance is 23 kilograms per person. So after you've dropped your bags off, you head on through security. So you've got the north side here, which is between B and C, and then there's a equivalent on the other side called the south side security. Once past security, you're in the airside part of the terminal that has duty-free shops and restaurants. For a relatively new terminal, it felt overcrowded and chaotic. My advice is to find somewhere to sit, preferably near your gate, and don't move. Take note of where your gate is, as it may actually be quite far from this part of the terminal. All the A labelled gates are at this part of the terminal. For B and C gates, you need to take the transit train to where the gates are, so keep this in mind and give yourself plenty of time to get there. The gate for my flight to Dubai was an A gate located down a set of escalators. It looks like we are being bussed. There's no air bridge.
Let's go! Ooh, the purple buses. We shouldn't take those.
The bus journey to the plane itself was surprisingly quite far. The stairs to board the aircraft had some lighting, but it wasn't adequate enough, so I had to use my phone's torchlight.
Hi, thanks for providing the lights.
Indeed. Club suite. Go straight down. Go on, carry on. I'll tell you when to stop. This is premium economy. I found it a bit odd that since they were using stairs to board the aircraft, why they didn't have one at the rear to make it easier for economy passengers to board. Once seated, I didn't manage to take any videos of the seats as it was a full flight. However, here are some videos from when we landed. The seats are set up in a 3-4-3 arrangement. I am 5'10" and the legroom from where I was sat was more than enough. And this is what the legroom is like on other seats, which doesn't seem too bad at 31 inches pitch. The seats were comfortable and had height adjustable headrests with wings that you can use to rest your head on. I was sat in a bassinet seat. However, the downside is that the flight entertainment screen had to be stowed away during takeoff and landing, which doesn't help when it's the main tool to keep children occupied. I would be better off in a regular seat where you can use the in-flight entertainment all the time. On the seat itself beside me there were some buttons and the headphone socket. There were no power outlets apart from a USB-A socket. Unfortunately, all my devices were USB-C. BA includes earphones in envelopes which you can also use to donate leftover foreign currency. The earphones were of poor quality. Unfortunately, the in-flight entertainment wasn't much better. The screens were slow and not as responsive as one would hope. One odd feature was a chat room which reminded me of the chat rooms in the early days of the internet. There were the usual offering of maps, but not as good as some of the more modern versions found on other airlines or even modern versions of aircraft offered by BA. In terms of content itself, we had a decent selection of movies and TV shows. However, don't expect the variety found on likes of Emirates. Generally, being a lovely blue British Airways Executive Club member doesn't get you anything, but on this flight you can use the messaging apps on Wi-Fi for free just by being a member. There are packages available to even stream video with an entire flight package costing $14.99. There was an included blanket, however no pre-departure drinks or towels were provided. Premium economy did have that. This is one of the reasons why I think premium economy in BA is equivalent to economy service on Emirates and Qatar. We took off at 9:50 PM and dinner service started at 11:30 PM UK time. Drinks were initially served along with pretzels. However, this was where I encountered my first major issue with BA. It turned out that despite me having requested a halal meal, it wasn't registered on the system. I ended up having a prawn dish, which to my luck, they still had available. Otherwise, I would have had to go without food on this flight. Oddly, some members of my family did get the halal meal. As they weren't hungry, I got to try both the halal dish and the prawn. The halal meal was chicken and rice, and taste-wise was the most blandest meal I've ever had in a while. Surprisingly, the prawn was actually quite tasty. This was one of the kids' meal, which was mac and cheese. Again, quite bland, but okay for kids, I guess. The dessert was apple crumble and custard. More amazingly, it was labelled as suitable for halal diets. On this particular flight, I didn't sleep well, yet somehow I managed to miss breakfast. The flight attendants didn't wake me up for breakfast. Emirates, for example, have stickers that you attach to your seat asking to be woken up for meal service. So that was the end of the 7-hour overnight flight from London Heathrow to Dubai on a Boeing 777. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't great either. However, I didn't realise how better it could have been until the return leg. Now here's the return leg, and this is where, at least for me, it is truly a tale of two halves. This time we were on a relatively new Boeing 787. Unlike Heathrow, we boarded via an air bridge with a separate one for business class passengers. As soon as I entered the aircraft, it felt a lot newer than the previous 777. It even felt more spacious. Seating was laid out in a 3-3-3 configuration. Even though technically the seat pitch is identical to the 777, just the layout of 9 seats abreast instead of 10 meant the feeling of more space. The seats felt more comfortable with more cushioning, making for a comfortable seat. One of the good parts of the seat on the previous flight were these headrests, so I'm glad they made it onto the seats on this 787. I was sat in the middle section, and this is what the legroom was like. The earphones were like the previous flight. This is where I think there is room for improvement. However, what was immediately noticeably improved was the in-flight entertainment. It had 2 headphone sockets which were a bit confusing, but this is for shared watching and listening, which the previous flight didn't have. Unfortunately, it still had a USB-A socket. However, there were power outlets under the seats, which was nice to see. To the right of the screen there was a weird slot. Later on I found out that it's for a credit card, which is needed as you can now order items via the screen. Like many new cars nowadays, most of the controls have now moved to the touchscreen. This was the tiny button used to turn on the reading light. You can also use the on-screen controls to call the flight attendant. The in-flight entertainment was a vast improvement from the previous flight. It felt like a generational upgrade with more responsive screens and smoother menus. The in-flight entertainment allowed you to sign into streaming services like Paramount Plus. It would be more useful to have other streaming services available. However, it helped that the selection available was improved and more vast than the previous flight. Still, it wasn't as varied as an Emirates. One tip that will save you some time is to skip the first few minutes, as they are just adverts that are built into the video file at the start. For children, there was a small selection of games to keep them occupied. More importantly, and uniquely to British Airways, as I've not seen this anywhere else, is the ability to set age ratings on contents for seats. I feel like this should be automated and linked to the data they hold on passengers, but this being an option is very welcome. While on the topic of in-flight entertainment, the maps, although initially taking a minute to load, once loaded was great and responsive, a bit like Google Maps. One very useful tool for Muslim travellers is the direction of Mecca, which can be found in the maps. Even prayer times are shown here, which saves you having to work it out, as it can be quite difficult since the aircraft is moving constantly. Like the previous flight, Wi-Fi is available, so I won't go over that again. One thing I didn't show you was the toilets from the previous flight. Take my word when I say this was more spacious on the 787 compared to the previous flight on the 777. Everything was essentially made to be touchless, with automatic taps that turn on with motion to a touchless flush button. It's not often mentioned in other reviews, but the height of the sink was a decent height, making it easy for kids to use on their own. Many aircraft toilets seem to put the sink too high for kids. One other peculiar thing was the middle section, which looked like a door that could open. I suspect that this is for wheelchair users. Not actually sure how it would work, but I'm sure they have a way. Overall, the toilets were clean, spacious and easy to get in and out of. Now, I've shown you what a disaster my meal service on my previous flight was, with BA forgetting my halal meal request. This time round they had my request. I received chicken and rice. It tasted as bland as my previous flight, so maybe I would have been better off with a seafood dish like prawn. To be fair to BA, the salad was actually nice and was one of the tastiest part of the meal. The dessert was a weird fruit dish. The fruit itself was okay, but the other white part was disgusting. As this was a daytime flight, there was a snack later on in the flight. This was a pizza. Again, it was a halal pizza. My kids loved this and would have preferred this over what was offered to kids earlier for lunch. So that wraps up my experience flying British Airways economy class on a Boeing 777 and a 787. Overall, it's clear that the two flights were very different in terms of comfort, service and experience. The Boeing 777, while functional, felt outdated with a cramped cabin, poor in-flight entertainment and forgettable meals. Boarding via the stairs and walking through premium cabins wasn't ideal, and the lack of a registered halal meal was a big letdown. It wasn't a terrible experience, however, but it left a lot to be desired, especially when compared to other full-service airlines. On the other hand, the Boeing 787 felt like a completely different experience and even a completely different airline, to be honest. The cabin was more spacious with its 333 layout, the seats were far more comfortable, and the in-flight entertainment was noticeably better. Small touches like the Makkah direction in the map and prayer times were very useful for us Muslim travellers. However, the food on both flights was underwhelming and the lack of USB-C ports was disappointing. Considering this is a new aircraft, I expected up-to-date tech and standards. That said, I redeemed Avios points for this trip, and considering the limited redemption options, this was one of the few choices that worked. I could have redeemed on Qatar Airways, but their higher tax charges cancelled out any value of using the points. And because I used points, I didn't feel like I got a bad deal overall. However, if I had paid cash for the flight on the 777, I would have been very disappointed with the experience. My final tip is, if you can fly on BA's 787, I'd opt for that and make every effort to avoid their 777s. Thank you for watching, and I hope this review gives you a better idea of what to expect on British Airways.